Yeah, we're live. It's a little after 7:14 to be exact. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to go ahead and put something up here. Yo, where you at? And we're going to talk about turbos, one of my favorite subjects, and more specifically, we're going to talk about compressor maps because I was doing some thinking, and when you go on the internet and you're searching around and taking a look at different compressor maps and different turbos, and I get lots of comments and feedback and obviously questions about this kind of stuff. But I thought it was interesting. So here's the thing: we've got a lot to talk about. How many people choose their turbo based on what they're looking at on a compressor map? We got a couple of problems here. First of all, for a lot of guys, most of us, all of these inexpensive offshore turbos, very few of them have compressor maps. Now, yeah, we can look at a Garrett one or Borg Warner one that's kind of close and kind of speculate. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm not even talking about some we have them and some we don't. Let's assume that you were choosing a turbo that had a compressor map available for it. How many of us look at the compressor map on the turbo and go, oh, hey, look, this one at the power level that I want it to be is 69% efficient in the most efficient part of the map. Okay, that's where I want to be. I need that because the other ones I looked at were only 68 or 67%. How many of us pick our turbo based on wanting to run it in this like efficiency island? I know that this turbo is the most efficient. Let's say it's 73 or 74%, whatever the number is. How many of us would pick it based on that number? And how important is that number when you're looking at the compressor map? How important is that really big efficiency number? Here's what I came up with, and here's what I was thinking. I honestly don't think it's that important. And not because I don't think that turbo efficiency is important. I think that it is. I think that it's important. I think that if you can have your turbo run as efficient as you can, you're probably going to make more horsepower per pound of boost relative to the NA motor, because we know that that's really the big contributing factor. It's the NA motor power output, and then the turbo, and then other little things. But my point is, and here's what I was thinking, and here's the conversation I was having with myself after looking up a bunch of this information. It's this. If you take a look at a compressor map, any compressor map for almost any turbo, if you take a look at the map, the island of most efficiency is not where most people would run it. Let me give you an example. So if we take a compressor map that is a 900 horsepower turbo, S475 style, that kind of thing. If we take that map and look at the map, the island of efficiency might be in the 600, the most efficient area of that island, of that compressor map, might be in the 700 horsepower range. Now it's actually going to be a fairly broad range, and that's the great thing about turbos is that really efficient part of the island is pretty big. But I'll tell you where it's not. Where it never is. It's never to the far right side of that map as you're looking at it. And the thing is, what I was thinking is, this is certainly true of most people. It's certainly true of every racer. If you have a turbo, what guys that go race do is they're not going to run their 900 horsepower turbo at that 700 horsepower range. Some guys might, and they would be smart because that's where the turbo is going to be the most efficient. What most of the guys are going to do, and certainly guys that have an S475 or GT45 clone or any of those things that we would get, even ones that don't have compressor maps on them, where are those guys going to run their turbos? They're going to run it over on the far side in the all of it range. And quite honestly, for those guys, and this is what I'm going to do a big video on this. I'm going to do a full length video. I just thought I wanted to talk to you guys about it first on all of my live feed guys. But think about this. If a guy is running at the drag strip and he's going to want to use all the turbo. So if he has a GT45 or an S475, he's not running the turbo where it's most efficient. As a matter of fact, they're running in where it's not very efficient at all. If they run it all to the far to the right side, where the maximum flow rate is, where the intersection of maximum flow rate and usually impeller speed, it's not going to be very efficient there. The island of efficiency, we've gone way down. We might have gone down from 69% to 54% or some number. We'll be able to take a look at that and on an actual map, and I'll be able to show you what I'm talking about. And the thing is, if you look at the island where it's most efficient, we may be gaining lots of horsepower per pound of boost there. And we're gaining a lot less out at this maximum range where guys run the turbo when they're trying to max the turbo out. So let's say on their last 2 pounds of boost, instead of 25 horsepower per pound, they're only getting 19. And then the last one, maybe they're only getting 13. They don't really care about that. They don't care that they're not running in the most efficient part of that island. The reason that they don't care about that is because they gained power. As they turn the boost up, they might not get as much as they would if they turned it up in the sweet spot, but they don't care about that. They're trying to max the turbo out. If they have 1,000 horsepower turbo, then they're trying to get 1,000 horsepower out of it. And the way that you do that from being a turbo guy is you turn the boost up. And it doesn't matter to you that the fact that you're outside of that island of efficiency. So even if you chose the turbo for that map, oh, look, that's like 74% there. They don't care about that because they're not running it there. And I think that that's well, I can put it to you guys. What do you guys think? Do you think that most guys do that? How many guys do you know? Because I don't know any. I don't know anybody that buys a 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo and only runs it at 700 horsepower because it's most efficient there. I don't know very many guys that do that. I mean, for a stationary, agricultural pump motor or something where you ran it at a constant RPM and constant load and ran it at that boost level, that might work really well. But I don't think that most guys that race do that, because what they're going to do is if they run it at 10 pounds, and let's say at 10 pounds, it's in the nice area of efficiency on the island, on the map, they're not going to stay there. They're going to turn it up because 10 pounds is good. But you know what's better than 10 pounds? 12, 15, 20, or whatever that turbo will do on their combination. So I submit that the compressor map, while it's useful and we all want to look at it and we should know how to read it, I'm going to be doing videos on that. I just don't think a lot of guys run their turbo where that is most efficient. Here's the flip side to that. That one side is guys, drag racers and stuff are running their turbos all out. So if you have 1,000 horsepower turbo, you want to run it at 1,000 horsepower. And when you run it at 1,000 horsepower, it's not efficient. It's not as efficient as it would be if you ran less power than that. The other side of that is if we have a 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo, and we were to only run it at the 700 horsepower range where it's very efficient, where we know it's maximizing its horsepower per pound of boost relative to the motor, and the charge air is cool, and all the benefits that come with running in the island of being most efficient and not running on the island of misfit toys area. Here's the other thing that happens, and this is something for guys to be concerned with that are running, that might be wanting to run in the maximum efficiency island and not running it all out. Guys on the other side of the scale. Here's the thing that they should be thinking of. If you, and we've talked about this many times, if you have a 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo and you're only running it at 600 or 700 horsepower, then you would be much better off picking a smaller turbo. And the reason for that has less to do with being in the island of efficiency, because let's say that on your 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo, you're running at 700 horsepower, you're right in the meaty part of the island where it's doing very well. The other thing that you have to think about is if you're only running it at 700 horsepower on your 1,000 horsepower or 900 horsepower turbo, it's not going to be as responsive on the other end, on the beginning end, as it would be if you only ran a 700 or 750 or 800 horsepower turbo. Instead of having all that excess, if you ran a smaller turbo that was more efficient, and again, while it might not be the most efficient, because again, if you run a smaller one, it might not be in the island of efficiency. It might actually, and that's the nice thing about turbos is, like I said, this area can be pretty broad. But the thing is, it will be more responsive because generally speaking, if you put a smaller turbo on, it's going to be more responsive. A 700 horsepower turbo should be more responsive than a 1,000 horsepower turbo, irrespective of where you are on the maps. So that's the other thing to consider. And the thing is, a comparison between those two turbos, even if the 900 or 1,000 horsepower turbo is ultimately more efficient and has a better looking compressor map and is more efficient in the maximum efficiency island, if you were to do a roll-on race at 2,000 RPM, like everybody wants me to do when I do these engine dynos, run it from as low as you can and let's see what the boost response is, on a smaller turbo, it's going to win that race every time. Even if ultimately the bigger turbo makes more power, more horsepower per pound of boost, if you run them at the same boost and both of them can support that power level, the smaller turbo is going to be more efficient. It's going to come up on boost sooner. It's going to make things happen sooner, and it's going to pull out a lead on the other one, and the other one's not ever going to be able to run it down. So, and a lot of guys want a really they care less about the efficiency than they want the thing to be responsive. So if you're a guy that's running low boost and you're driving on pump gas, or you're driving on the street or whatever, and you want something that's going to make this amount of power, then you size the turbo to do that and then make it more responsive. I know that I tell you guys, if you want to make 600 or 700 horsepower, you should probably just put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it. And you should, because you're going to go up. Most people do. But the thing is, it will be more responsive if you size your turbo so it's the most responsive and then allows you also to reach whatever power goal you're trying to make. So again, my point is, if the guy's looking to make the thing really responsive, is he concerned with the compressor map? Can we still work with the compressor map on the super responsive side and on the maximum effort side? How much of both sides of that intersect this compressor map, irrespective of the fact that most of the turbos that we choose don't have compressor maps anyway, and so it's difficult to even pick that or speculate about it. And then again, the whole nother subject is, okay, now what do we do to the hot side of that after we pick our compressor map? Because there's some juggling there. And obviously the 1,000 horsepower turbo that you pick for or even a 900 horsepower turbo that we pick for our 4.8 is going to be different than the one that we pick for our 5.3 or our 6.0, or 6.2, 408, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly on the hot side, it's definitely going to be different. But these are the kind of things that I think about while I'm driving and looking around on the internet and answering questions for people. And so I think it's important. I will get people that will argue with me adamantly about turbo stuff. Oh, you have to pick this one because it's way more efficient. I'm like, look, I know how to read a map. I understand it. I can look at that island and go, hey, we're at this NA power level. We're at this much boost. They intersect right here. This is where the map part is. This is where we'd be running. And this is awesome. Except that what happens if we don't run it there? What if we're running it at less boost than that and less power than that? What happens if we're running it at more boost and more power than that? Then all we're doing, if we're running at more boost, all we're doing is transitioning through there at some point. And while that might be beneficial a little bit, the reality is the maximum effort guys are not there. And I think to some extent, the guys that want the thing to be real responsive are also not there. So let me know what you guys think. And that's what we'll get started on our conversation for tonight. Let me know how you guys are doing. And let me know what you think about this. Let me know what you guys think about the compressor map stuff. And tell me if you think that there's any merit to any of this stuff. Sounds like I need a GT35 on my big block Mopar with a rev limiter set at 3,800. That would be good. That's a diesel, right? That was a whole nother conversation that I was going to have tonight. I got some emails from a guy that wants to make a gas version more. He's kind of trying to replace a diesel version with a gas version, and maybe that will be an interesting conversation that we can have later on. And we'll talk about the things that you could do to make that better. I might do a video on that, because always good to get comments and suggestions from people out there. Yes, okay. So from all that, Chris, you're just, okay, 1,000 horsepower turbo it is. LH6 aluminum 5.3 with twin eBay GT45s and a dual plenum Holly. That's going to be that'll be a lot of power that you can make with that combination. Dave Vizard in 1988 about staying out of the surge zone with a 2-liter Pinto with a TO4 V trim at 265 flywheel horsepower. Dean, that's the other thing is you would have to look on, and that's one of the problems with staying out of the surge zone is that's to the far left side as you're looking at the paper. That happens when you try to put a really big turbo on a small motor. So let's say you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with your 2-liter deal. It becomes difficult to do because you can't ever get it to make enough power and then enough boost to make enough power, and it can become problematic. If you want to make 1,000 horsepower, get 1,000 horsepower turbo. That's good advice. I'm still trying to decide between a 7875 Gen 2 T4 and an 88 millimeter T6 from VS Racing. It just depends on what those two things will suit different power needs. Obviously, an 88 could make a lot of power. He moved up the cam size to let the oversized turbo do more work. Well, what you're doing there, Dean, is you're increasing the power output of your NA motor. So you're changing where you would be on the map. And I'm a big proponent of that. Like I said, if the 1-liter Sprint is a good example, that motor makes about 50 horsepower or so NA. So if you're trying to make 300 horsepower with that, it takes a lot of boost. But if we can improve the power output of that NA motor to 70, 80, 90 horsepower, which would be a lot. If you can do that, you're going to change your position dramatically on the map. And you're going to make it easier to get to any power level at a lower boost level. And that's nothing but good. Let's see, 7875 Gen 2 or 88 millimeter T6 on LQ4 with LS3 heads. If you're only looking for 800 to 900 wheel horsepower, the Gen 2 will certainly do that. That will be up near the limit of what it can do. So if you want more room to play with, the 88 would be, but an 88 with a T6 is going to be a little softer, obviously. Karen, I have a daily driver truck with a 5.3. I'm looking at an S475. I only want to make 500-ish. An S472 or an S468. Those would be better than the S475. You don't need an S475. Even the small T4 ones that we ran as twins, it works. But 500 is like GT45 kind of territory. You can put something small on there. The only way to know if you're choosing the right turbo is to compare the mass measurements with power level. That's actually not the only way. That's one way. How big is too big? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. Like I talked about, one of the problems with going too big on the turbo is you get into surge, and if you don't have enough NA power to work with that big turbo, it makes life difficult. That's where you have to compound it or put nitrous on it. 5.3 twin turbo, eventual goal of 1,200 wheel horsepower as a daily commuter. Yeah, we want it to get 50 miles to the gallon too, I'm sure. Crash, any thoughts on timing sets for I don't know what you mean by timing sets, like the timing gears? We use factory timing gears on all of our stuff. I'm building 4.3 there, just about done. Got a cam, port heads, valve springs, port intake. It's got a blower on it, 10 pounds of boost. I'm trying to get 400 horsepower out of it with headers. You can do over 400 with a 4.3 without any problem with a blower on it. It just has to have the right blower on it. We did that with the Torque Storm, and we've done that with turbos also. How is 6-liter Gen 3 cammed 4L80 with a GT45 on a 15? A GT45 is getting near the hot side limit on a 6-liter, so it's not going to make a lot of power. 600 at the tire is going to be fairly high back pressure on a 6-liter on a GT45. Looking for a cheap small turbo for 125 horsepower on a 1.2-liter. I think that look at the Volkswagen turbos. You look for a used VW 1.8T turbo. It would be good for that. I can understand selecting a turbo to be efficient at cruise RPM. The turbo selection, it doesn't matter at cruise RPM because there's no boost, there's no pressure. When you're cruising down the road, it's not doing anything. You could put any size turbo you want on it for it to cruise well. Yeah, Dean, and I've talked about that statement that every cam is a turbo cam. It just doesn't matter. I mean, there are turbos cams that are better for turbo applications, definitely are, and especially if you're trying to make lots and lots of power. But for most of us in the 1,000 horsepower and less range, and even higher than that, actually, if you pick a camshaft that makes the power curve that you want, and then you just add boost, it's still going to be that power curve. And you can even manipulate that power curve if you have an electronic boost controller, especially one that's is a function of RPM. Then you can tailor the curve. You can have it a rising boost curve out of the top, so you can have it pull on the big end if you wanted to do that. That's why I like doing the cam like that, rather than, oh, I got to have a blower cam because of this valve event and all of that stuff. I don't look at it that way. The Mopar Magnum videos will come out after we run the Mopar Magnum on the dyno. Nitrous is good anti-lag. Crash, I've never run double roller stuff on an LS. It takes a lot of work and to do that, and I don't think I haven't found it to be necessary. 2-valve heads versus 4-valve heads on the same displacement and turbo. What would one expect on the performance of the engine? If the 4-valve head makes more power than a 2-valve head, which you would expect it to do, like if you were comparing a 4-valve 4.6 mod motor versus a 2-valve 4.6 mod motor, the 4-valve is going to make a lot more power. So then it's going to make more power at any given boost level when you add a turbo. So would an S480 be about perfect for 1,000 wheel horsepower on an LQ4 with cam port heads? Yeah, you could do that with an S480. That's right in that wheelhouse. And a 110 is going to work on an LQ4. You could go bigger than that. Trying to think if you could. I think on the S475, I think the T6 stuff was like a 132. And I think you could be out in that range too on a LQ4, because a 6-liter is going to be fairly torquey. Yeah, GT25 on a 1.2. I was thinking that we ran, when I did the Sprint motor, which is a 1-liter, I think we ran GT20s. We ran a GT20 from Garrett, but I also ran the 1.8 turbo, the factory turbo on the Volkswagen, and that worked very well. It had good response rate and made good power. And guys were giving those away because everybody was upgrading their Volkswagen turbos because those things are tiny. Jim, I don't know about that turbo. I don't know about that specific turbo. It looks like if it's an 88 millimeter, that sizing would be big enough. I just don't know how they designed it for the Detroit diesel application. Obviously, they weren't thinking 1,200 horsepower when they did it. S460 83T4 1.1 AR. Yeah, and I don't even think it needs to be that big, Karen. I think probably a 366 would probably be enough for what you're talking about. A GT3582 will make. We've made 500 at the tire with that, but on a smaller motor. I don't know if it has the hot side flow for that. Old school small block 406, what turbo cam ignition setup works best? Whenever we run any of the small block stuff, we run an MSD with an ignition amplifier, like a 6AL on it. Rich, you need to tell me how much power you want to make. But 1,000 horsepower is going to be an S475 or so. Do you think a bigger throttle body would be better for the 4.3 I'm doing, or ported one? If you're blowing through it, you don't have to really worry about throttle body size. Yamaha Seika Turbo, there's OG. that's like, I think that's Yamaha Seika Turbo came after the 500 turbo, right? My Yamaha Seika Turbo was also in boost at 70 mile-an-hour cruise. How could the turbo be making boost at cruise RPM with a closed throttle? Where is it making boost at unless it doesn't have a bypass valve? It's not uncommon to see boost at cruise. I don't know how you see boost. I had all of the turbo cards I've ever owned at cruise. When you're cruising down the road, like down the freeway, they're running under vacuum. Not even just a little bit of vacuum, quite a bit of vacuum. Twin Paxton Novi 1000 462 valve. What do you recommend for wide open throttle time? I don't know about pump gas stuff. I don't ever run pump gas stuff. And it doesn't tell me what kind of boost you're running either, and whether that thing's intercooled. Is it possible to predict how quick a turbo will spool by using the map? No, not on the compressor side. For boost at cruise RPM, I was thinking about engineering projects with tiny displacements, not for performance. Wrong audience here. No, this is the right audience, but it's interesting to a mile per gallon. So, well, if you're trying to get high mile per gallon, you wouldn't want to be running under pressure then. Avenel Q4 with a 132 S480. That's kind of what I was thinking, Ryan. A stage 2 turbo cam, and it's a BC. That should make plenty of power. The S480 should be, that's a 4-digit power level turbo. Kyle, the twin GT3582s are 1,000 horsepower turbos for the two of those. If you want to step up, the cheap way to do it, or the GT45s. There's obviously intermediate stuff in between there. The GT45s could go to like probably 1,300 or 1,400, but they're really inexpensive. More power for my 225 Turbo Slant 6. Any suggestions for turbo and carb? Yeah, I on that one, I think a GT30, like the Max Speeding guys sent some GT3582s. I think that they would be good on that one. I'm trying to think. We had a 62 or a 67 millimeter precision also that worked pretty well for that. The T76 that CX Racing has, something around that size, I think worked pretty well. And a carburetor, we would run a blow-through 4-barrel carburetor on there. I learned about boost modulation with a 1275 A series. Nice. Is it in a Mini Cooper? SVO style TO3 40 turbos. Yep. Turbo probably is too big for 78 cubic inches. Stop braking. Yeah. Those are cool motors though. And I met a guy, and you might be interested in this, Dean. I met a guy who, what did he do? Oh, he had a Mini Cooper, an old one with a 1275 in it. And he put a 4-valve BMW motorcycle engine head on it, and then turbocharged it and he had an Eclipse intercooler, and he had he cast his own front cover for the head and the timing chain and stuff. This guy was awesome. And I went for a ride in it, and he was running like 20 pounds in this thing, and it was really, really fast and fun. It was awesome. Dylan, I think you could run a T6 flange on that on an S480 with a 6-liter. And put some decent heads on the Magnum. Yeah, I would like to try some kind of head. 4200s in the house. What benefit do you find with an MSD? We like running an ignition amplifier when we're running boost on the small block stuff. We bring the gap down, and the other thing is on a distributor, we obviously don't have the coil energy on a distributor with a single coil that you do on especially at higher RPM, that you do on a multi-coil deal, because of the rise time. There's less time for the charge to happen and for the coil to repower itself, basically. So we like to have an ignition amplifier, and it just helps, makes us feel better. I wonder where you guys are taking your boost readings under cruise. It's got to be on the pressure side of the throttle body then. because my Sprint turbo didn't do that. I mean, none of the turbo cars that I've owned have ever cruised down the road under boost. They cruise down the road under vacuum. I'm taking my reading in the intake manifold and not maybe guys are taking them at the turbo. Which turbo would you prefer run an LQ4 with LS3 in a street car? So you have an LQ4 with LS3 heads, I'm assuming? Well, if you have a T6 in it and you want more response, you could go down to the T4. A 3400 stall should be enough for that combination, though. Makes me wonder what cam you have in that thing. I'm talking about cruising on the freeway like at 65 or 70 miles an hour or whatever. I know because when I was doing it in the Sprint, you want to you can feel the enrichment when you get into boost, and so we have a vacuum and a boost gauge on, and you can see it wants to cruise down the road in the right engine speed. I even had a boost gauge on my Civic VX so that we could keep it in the lean burn. I mean, you can feel it as a driver. I can. You can feel when it goes from the lean burn into regular, 14.7 to 1, and then goes into enrichment. You can feel the different steps as you're doing that. But I like having the gauge there so that I knew what to do. But like I said, on the Sprint, and unless we were going up a grade, then you would go into boost a little bit. Devin, I don't know that you would expect more horsepower out of a billet wheel versus a cast wheel. It just depends on whether or not they changed the design of the wheel when they went from one to the other. If it's an exact duplicate and one has chock full ability goodness, that may just mean it lasts longer, it can run more engine speed, unless they change the design of it. On a 2-liter engine, what turbo size would I see? The 2-liter engine is not the thing. You'd have to look at what the NA power output is, and then what the map of the turbo is to see where you would run into surge. I know, Mike. Nobody clicks the like. They just come here to talk, and nobody's showing any love. Yeah, and ring the bell. Julius is in the house. Yeah, the TBS has a T6. So if you went down to a T4, it's going to be more responsive. I'd like to know what that turbo should be fairly responsive on a 6-liter. We've run those kinds of turbos a lot. But, now that I think about it, I think that the S480 that we run, because that's Freiburger's, and I think it is a T4. Super Rotter, you certainly could use 2 of the GM turbo diesels turbos on your 6-liter. I think that would work better than 1. What's the maximum horsepower if I add a turbocharger to my stock 455 volts? I don't know what the maximum is, but if you added 7 pounds of boost to that thing and you improve the power output by 50%, you would notice it and it would feel really, really good. What brand of air water intercooler do you use for down testing? The one that we normally use, I have a couple. A couple of them are from CX Racing, and the other one was from ProCharger. And we have had issues in the past with other things with cores leaking water. Primarily, that's from us. When I say us, I mean me, not emptying the cores out and blowing them dry while they sit for 4 or 5 or 6 months or whatever. And I think it's just the electrolysis. I think it's just eating away at the core. little off topic, are there any Fox body curvature? How strong is a factory 8.8? Well, guys can drag race those a lot. Are you trying to shock load it with a manual trans? LY6, 799, stage 2, fast. Ford Warner S482, S400, SX3, 8287 built with tile V-band. 1.16 rear be too large for street and strip, looking for 1,000 horsepower. An S482 is, if you're, I don't know what you mean by the plus at the end of the 1,000. If you're wanting to go to 11 or 1,200, then that turbo can probably do that. If you're looking for 1,000 horsepower less, you don't need that big of a turbo. What would you suggest a good turbo for a K20, K24 for around 650 horsepower? Steve, take a look at the test that I ran, the 4 different turbos on our K24, and you'll kind of see, and they were all run right in that power range. And you can kind of see what the response rate is and stuff. On an LS 408 with an S475, should I use a 2-bar? I think Neil, you're going to be at 2-bar, you're going to be up near the limit of, or up near the maximum flow limit of that S475. I'm certain that your LS408, if it has heads and cam in it, it's going to be making, it should be easily 550 horsepower, I would think. And then you're going to get to the flow limit of the S475, I think, before you run into, before you get past 14.7 pounds. But it's always good to put a 3-bar or more, in my case, in there, because sometimes you'll top that out. You can, Tristan says you can make 40 freewheel horsepower after camming a Magnum 5.9 just by porting, unshrouding the valve seats, work the dome, and add port volume to the tops of the exhaust ports. So you think a ported head is going to help. Is a 7875 with a 96 AR work as a substitution for a GT45 from VS Racing? Trying to stick with them if possible. Shocked that a 6-liter can spool twin GT45s. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, obviously, but it certainly can. And it would be more for drag racing if you ran twin GT45s. Yeah, the Magnum heads are not ideal, but they are a big step up from an LA head, though. Lancia Delta Integrale, yep. Those were cool. The supercharger was not there to prevent compressor surge. It was there so that they could have more response rate. Yeah, Cruise, you should be like when we did the testing with the I can't remember if we did it with the Sprint. I think we did it with the Civic hatch, and we simulated the RPM and load because I had the vacuum gauge on the dyno and in gear, in 5th gear, and it took about it was about 10.5 horsepower to run that mile an hour. I think it was 65 at that load, at that idle, not idle, but at that vacuum, at that RPM. That was the wind resistance and the rolling resistance and all that stuff. So it was about 10 horsepower at that engine speed, 10.5. I have a 355 with 11.5 to 1 compression. Is it worth boosting? You're gonna have detonation issues with that on a regular small block, but you can certainly run some boost on it. Oh, an LS3 long block, so it's a 6.2, James. That's even better, though. The displacement should help you with the response rate. When I take my boost ratings on the pressure side of the throttle body, with the blower every 1,000 RPM is just over a pound of boost. That concerns me that you're building pressure. I'm assuming that you have the throttle partially closed and that you're talking about pressure on between the turbo and the throttle body, but it concerns me that the blow-off valve isn't opening to relieve any kind of pressure that would be there. Have you ever done a test on a comparison between a cast wheel and a billet wheel? No, I haven't. And again, like I said, I don't know when they do that if they change the wheel. If they don't change the wheel design, I wouldn't expect to see any power. Can you really have a laggy turbo on a V8 LS with something like an S480 or similar? Yeah, an S480 is big enough. If you put a T6 S480 on a 4.8, it's going to be laggy. It definitely is going to be. I have a 2-liter with a T6 VGT. I use a vacuum accessory to control the VGT, then it opens at 15 pounds. It works well. Cool. How do you compare the NA horsepower output to the compressor map? That's how this whole thing started with me, is from decades back reading compressor maps. That's where this horsepower boost formula comes from. It all comes from a compressor map. Because before you know how much power your motor is going to make at any given boost level, that's the bottom one is the flow rate, basically, and the top one is boost. And so the lower one tells you how much it's basically power. So for you to know what the power is and where that's going to intersect with the boost level, you have to know how much NA power your motor makes. So before you can do that, you can't know where those intersect. That's why when I test, I always test the NA power output, so then we can know if it's following that formula and doing what it's supposed to do. The L67, we're working on it. We're trying to get it running, man. TBS has a VS Racing 88. Any chance you can throw in parasitic and drivetrain losses on your engine dyno results? Most of us use a chassis dyno. We can't add that to the engine dyno. That's not what we test there. Although I have videos up on drivetrain losses and the difference between an engine dyno and a chassis dyno. But there's a whole lot to discuss there, as we talked about in the video, because usually there's a change from the way that it's run on the engine dyno to the way that it's run on the chassis dyno, and then a whole nother way that it's run from the OEMs and how they rate their power output. So I don't try to compare those ever. It's not good. It's not good testing. If you run your thing on a chassis dyno and you make a change and you run it again, you'll see a delta. That's all you care about. You don't care about what the first number is and the second number is. You don't only care about the change. Same thing on an engine dyno. Whatever engine dyno you use, whether it's a Superflow or a hub dyno or a DTS or whatever it is, you're just looking for the difference. How much did my intake make? So when I went from the stock intake, it made this amount. When I put the other intake on, it made this amount. It gained this much power. It doesn't matter that it happened on this dyno or somebody else's dyno or chassis dyno. Most people recommend using a corrosion inhibitor in the loops for an air water intercooler. That's a good idea. We used to put water wetter in that, and I think that was pretty good, as long as that system was sealed. Noodles is in the house. Is there a fight tonight? Richard, by any chance, did you look at the manifold I made? I was very interested in your opinion. Yeah, I think you sent me did it come as an email or did it come as a message or something? I think I did look at it. Richard, whatever happened to the max speeding rods GT3582s? We ran 2 of them on the LS. I haven't run one of them on the K series though. A 600 wheel horsepower, I think, is beyond the range of that turbo. 500 wheel horsepower, I think, is in the wheelhouse, but 600 wheel horsepower, I think, is probably too much. Factory twin turbo 2.7 liter V6 5-valve motor revs to 7100, converted to single turbo with a PTE 5858 with a 6266. Get me close to 650 wheel horsepower. I don't know. I think that turbo can do that, but I don't know what the NA power output of that motor is, and the RPM that it revs to is irrelevant. We're going to run the K24 a lot more. Yeah, VS has all kinds of in-between turbos. There's lots of stuff that you can pick. Julius, does the extra length of intake piping from a turbo to the throttle actually work as an intercooler in a remote turbo setup, or is the air traveling too fast? In my opinion, it's traveling too fast. And then there's a boundary layer between the airflow in the tube itself. So I don't know how much transfer time it gets. It gets more transfer time when there's not a lot of flow, but that's not when you need it. I think it could help a little bit, but I don't think it works like an intercooler does. How efficient are the next gen VS Racing 7875? The Gen 2 stuff is like 1,000 horsepower turbo, so it will do that. Have you ever used MatchBot on BorgWarner's website? Going to see pressure ratios and compressor maps is pretty handy. Yeah, I've taken a look at their stuff. AFR heads, those are good. VR6 swap. Your GT3582 isn't going to cut it at 1,000 wheel horsepower, but two of them definitely would. ProCharge Mopar, let me know what happens when you get done porting those. I'm curious to see how well they flow. Speaking of boost, made a change on the air-to-air intercooler cross-section, increased 2 to 1 to 2.5 to 1. Big change in engine response. Mark, do you think that the intercooler was restrictive for you? I don't have the specs on that PTE 62 millimeter, Steve, unfortunately. That turbo's gone. I gave it to a buddy of mine. He's going to run it on this NSX. GM advertised 12 horsepower at 60 mile an hour for the Sunford in the mid 60s. See, that's right in the kind of range that I was thinking. DB, we use stock rockers on all the stuff that we've run, so they work just fine. If you want to put a trunnion upgrade on them, it's not a bad idea. Especially, I take a look at the rockers too. One of the things I noticed on a lot of the rockers when we get stuff that has 200,000 or 300,000 miles on it, you turn the rocker over, look at the pushrod cup. If it's really, really shiny, they get worn. And then obviously look at the slider too and see how worn that is, because unfortunately the trunnion upgrade doesn't fix either one of those. So you're going to have a change in or required pushrod length if there's a bunch of wear on either one of those. Do better flowing LS heads hurt low mid-range torque due to larger intake port size? Take a look at the, lucky for you, all of that information is up on the channel. Take a look at this big cylinder head test, and you can see if any of those hurt. They're definitely not going to hurt mid-range, and they're probably not going to hurt low speed either. So take a look, and you can see compared to the stock head. Let's see. Well, you can make an educated guess based on the engine characteristics. Someone needs to send Richard an 8. What is the 8? An 8 to 1? I'm sure that's that's my map sensor. On the maps, we multiply the lower number by 10, and this is boost on this side, and then you multiply this number down below, like this number, like right down here. What? Right down here. Multiply that number by 10. That gives you the power output. This side does boost. That intersection tells you, but you got to know the NA number. I get a lot of slack from people telling me I will have a slow response rate from long intercooler pipes, but I've never had an issue with the intercooler piping affecting response rate. Take a look at the video that's up where I did the response rate. We dramatically changed not just the length, but also the size, the diameter of the intercooler, and to see if that part of it had a change in response rate. And we know that changing the exhaust length, and that was a extreme example where we had about 14 feet of exhaust on a twin turbo deal that was already kind of laggy, to show what effect the exhaust had. But then I also did it on the compressor side. So take a look. That video is up. Noodle, see, it was the convertible is a Metro. Yeah, they didn't make a Chevy Sprint turbo convertible. Now somebody could have done it, but and really, a Metro XFI with a turbo on it would kind of be cool too. I would like that. I actually like the rounded versions of the later Metros more than I like the body style of the Sprint. But they stopped making it before they changed to that rounded body style. I think it's more aero, and it might even have better fuel mileage. But I like the Turbo Sprint because they're kind of cool and quirky. Uh-oh, Admiral. My NA is 605 horsepower. Well, that's a really good start. 605 horsepower and 598 foot-pounds at the rear tire. Is that from a big block or something? When you're going to be testing different size exhaust tubing for response rates, I've read that the smaller size benefits as long as it doesn't create much back pressure. Well, that sends the logic and reason, and that's one of the things I wanted to test more on the remote stuff than on the Y pipe thing. Because I think ultimately in the power levels that we're looking at and flow rates that we're looking at, the turbo hot side is the restriction in the setup. It's not the size of the tubing. Especially, my suspicion is that we normally run the factory exhaust manifold. So I think that the factory exhaust manifolds, if anything, might ultimately become more of a restriction than the Y pipe does, unless we went down to maybe 2 inches or something like that. I didn't run a blow-off valve hoping I could stay under boost. Have you ever thought about putting a turbo on your truck? And if you did, what would it be? I put turbos in my truck, like in the bed and in the back seat, but never went on there because it has a 4060E that's made of glass, and it will break if I put a turbo on it. Even if I set a turbo next to it, I think it will break. Julius, what you can do is if you do your test and you run the straight pipe, and I wanted to do this when we ran the test, and maybe I'll try that in the dyno. The problem with the straight pipe thing is where guys run it. If you run a remote setup and you run the tubing underneath the vehicle, does it get lots of airflow? Like, what temperature is the pipe at? Because if guys are worried about it cooling, are they also worried about it heating? Which I don't think happens either. But what I would want to see is what's the temperature differential? What's the temperature coming out of the turbo, and then at the end of that pipe going into the manifold, or even the temperature in the manifold. I would kind of like to see it at different spots to see if it is changing the air temperature. Let's see if it does that. Clayton, other than surge and less turbine life, Are there any other concerns for not running a BOV? That's not enough that it damages the turbo and then heats the air up for the next time you open the throttle. There's lots of bad stuff. You shouldn't do it. Dragon, I do have a friend with an NSX. As a matter of fact, not only does he have an NSX, but he's swapping the NSX. He's swapping his is a 3.2, so technically it's a big block in the NSX. It's a 3.2 J series Honda motor in it, which will be very, very cool with a turbo. It's Jimmy, my buddy from HP, and he's the guy that did the turbo that I had on my NSX back in the day, 91. I think it was a 91 back in the day. And they did a single turbo on mine, and we turned it up. I think he turned it up to 525 or something at the tire. So it did good. It was a lot of fun. I drove it around at about 400 or 420 at the tire, I think, on pump gas. And it worked very well. And that's one thing that I love that car. I would call it the Japanese Ferrari. And it was awesome because it was like having a Civic, but a really, really good looking one. But the thing that needed it, it only had 270 horsepower, I think, something like that. It needed more power. And I used to win a lot of races against guys in Corvettes because the one thing that car did was hook up really well and took off. So I knew how to get the thing to leave a light really well. And guys in Corvettes would usually get over anxious, and they had more power and they could win ultimately, but they couldn't get off the line. So they would spin the tires and so then I would just work them over at the lights. It's pretty fun. But once we had the turbo on there, it was a different story. The thing was a lot of fun. Tristan, take a look at the I think the guys from Summit have the 408 stroker stuff. I've put Speedmaster stuff in. We've run lots of different stuff. Yeah, I agree, Tim. It's risky to put it in the truck. Even we don't even stand next to the truck and talk about turbos, because if we do, we know that it's listening. And the transmission goes, oh, no. I'm all done here. Yeah, Texas Speed, BTR, those guys all should have stroker kits. Yeah, the blow-off valve doesn't open up under boost. The boost makes it close. So do you have, Mark, do you have that stuff mapped out so you can see the change in response? Can you see do you have a dyno where you're showing the response rate or some sort of data logging or something that's kind of showing what's going on? We do want to do a big bang on the 4200. Tim, it is a J32 because he wanted an inexpensive way to replace that. Have you ever heard of JFR Racing? Yeah, we've used their cams. As a matter of fact, I ran their cam for a really long time after we did the testing on the 4.8 liter, where we did the Slavic Stage 2 versus the World. JFR sent one of the cams, and we use it. I've used that, I don't know, 10 times now on different tests with that 4.8 liter. SRT4 turbo on my 26 horsepower V-twin Briggs. That's a big turbo for that motor. Brad, there's lots of cheap T3 turbos that you could make for a D series. Lots of those online. How much horsepower twin GT35 is worth on a 5.3? They'll do 1,000. Yeah, fuel pumps. Yes, also listen. You never tell what the total timing is on videos. I almost always tell you what the total timing is. I don't tell you what the curve is normally because we don't go into that much detail, but I almost always tell you what the total timing is. Real-time racing. Yes, I raced against P.D. Cunningham. I know those guys. Real-time racing ran supercharged NSX and IMSA back in the 90s. Yes, they did. And they even ran a blow-off valve to regulate the boost from the supercharger. They ran a Vortec on it and used the blow-off valve wastegate on the cold side to regulate boost pressure because they were limited in boost pressure by the SECA. So what they wanted to do was if they were limited at, let's say, 10 pounds, they wanted to have 10 pounds just not at the top of the RPM range. They wanted to also have 10 pounds back here. So they spun the blower up and then opened the wastegate bypass valve to regulate it at 10 pounds. It worked pretty good. A 4L60 will have a long, happy life with about 2.5 pounds of boost. More than that, figure on cubic bucks to make it live. An S480 will make 1,200 flywheel horsepower. 1,200 wheel horsepower gets a little bit, a little closer to the limit. Yes, AccuFab Racing. When you do one of those Big Bang episodes, you should go for ridiculously high RPM. Usually the Big Bang stuff is more about power. Would you consider doing a video on timing? Yeah, I was thinking about that today. I wanted to show what the different scale is for like when we do. I'll show you how we do an NA motor and show you what the curves look like, and then show you what the subsequent curves look like at each boost level. So as we go up, it depends on what map sensor we have our Holly set at for how much scaling we have and how many cells there are. But as we go up for each cell, I can say, okay, look, we went from, 100 kPa up to whatever the next jump was. We took out 3 degrees of timing or 1 degree of timing or whatever it is, and show you each step because as we go up in boost, we're taking timing away. And also, as we go down in RPM and up in boost, we're taking timing away. As we go up in RPM, we're adding timing. So same thing as the NA curve. So there's less timing down low and more at the top. And the same thing happens on the turbo. But also, as we go up in boost, we take away timing. So the curve looks a little bit different under boost. And I can show you all that stuff and show you what we do and kind of where we are. The thing that you won't get to see is you won't get to see any of the drivability or transition or any of that stuff because I don't do any of that. I honestly don't care about it anymore, to the point I don't have time to do all of that stuff while I'm on the engine dyno, because that's not what we're trying to show. We're trying to show what it does. So it just needs to go like from idle to needs to transition up, up to full throttle and then go at whatever boost level we're running it at. But I can show you what all the timing looks like. That's fairly simple. Will the 6L80 support my 4.3 with twin GT4s without much work done to it? I think it's going to take work for that kind of level. Uh, 17 pounds on an otherwise stock Vortec motor. That's a lot. Best thing about an S10 is getting axle hop and destroying the motor mounts. I'm surprised it doesn't destroy more than that. Yes, Vortec boost modulation. It was good stuff, and PD knows how to drive. There's no doubt about that. And that NSX was awesome. Happy hour for one. 78 or 76, 75 PT. That's like the one that we use, although we had the high Zoot CEA double throwdown billet wheel stuff. 6-liter FQ9 with 317 heads. What power do you think it'll make? I have no idea because I don't know what boost you're talking about, and I don't know what cam you have. And it depends on what 76, 75 it is, because like the CX Racing one, their 76 millimeter is like a 700 horsepower turbo maybe. And then the one that I got from Precision was like a 1200 horsepower turbo. It's a big difference in just the numerical designation. More interested in just timing fundamentals. Okay. Well, that's what I would show you with the timing video. What's my opinion on modern Hemis? I like them. They have really good cylinder head flow. They have good intake manifold, just like an LS. All they need is camshaft. We've done lots of boost on them. They make lots of power. The later stuff with the even better heads are even more impressive, and the dual runner intakes. I really like the Hemi stuff. On a VVT motor that pings on proper fuel, I don't know what you mean by proper fuel, but what do you adjust first? Cams or ignition timing? I would do ignition timing. But again, I'm the last guy you want to listen to for drivability and stuff. I'm not a tuner. So there may be guys out there that know what the answer to that is. That's the first thing that I would try and see if that worked, because I don't ever do HP tuners or any of that. So I might not be the right guy to listen to. Take an LS and get a cam that's good for 9,000 RPM. That's not just a cam. That's a lot more stuff besides a cam. Those 3,000 horsepower LS motors are running 8,700. A 3,000 horsepower LS motor is not just a cammed LS motor. That's a dedicated build that costs $1 million. What size turbo and cam do I need for my Cuisinart to make 60 margaritas an hour? After about the fourth one, I don't know that I would recognize that there were 60. How can I trust a professional chassis dyno tune and know the correct place using HP tuners? Are remote tunes and data logging better? I'm not the guy to answer that. I like chassis dyno tuning because after we run stuff on the engine dyno, it needs to be done on the chassis dyno anyway, because the engine configuration is going to be different. It's going to be running at a different temperature and stuff. And that's going to be more realistic compared to what we do. It has an optimized amount of air going to it, and it's cold and all that stuff. So I like having stuff done on the chassis dyno. And even then, even after the guys that do it, like Ish and Eric at Westech, do it on the chassis dyno, they always go out and street drive it to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do out on the street. So I guess turbo guys don't care about RPM. So did I hurt your feelings or something by saying what I said? And you can't use universal stuff. Turbo guys care about RPM because obviously those turbo motors are, if they're making 3,000 horsepower, they're running turbo motors at that RPM. So what are folks doing for transmissions when they get to 600, 800, or 1,000 horsepower? They're not using a 4L60. They're using a 4L80 probably, or a Power Glide, or a Turbo 400. Let's see. Alan, F2 Pro Charge 434, small block Chevy, CSU blow through. IC intercooler making 1330 and 879 to the tires. See, that's a good combination. That makes a lot of power. Where's the pizza? Thumble boost at cruise for a mile per gallon. A turbo compressor can be more efficient air pump than a piston. Captures waste power from the exhaust pulses. Need tiny displacement, like full throttle at cruise. I understand what you're saying about eliminating pumping losses, if that's what you're talking about. But eliminating pumping losses on an NA motor is not the same as having boost. If you're running boost on it, typically what guys do is bring timing down with boost and also bring fuel in. So that's usually not ideal for fuel mileage. .6 by 4.6 Born stroke big block. Okay, a V12 application, 15 liters. What size turbo is your direct man? 6,500 RPM, meant to haul like an 8. So are you using it for torque or something? To just supplant the diesel, or are you trying to make power with it? No, Flex, I understand what you're saying. It's really, really hard to run 9,000 RPM motors because it's really, really expensive to do that. We could take like I recently with the guys from Brian Tooley Racing, we've run 7,500 stuff a lot. He just ran one of the junkyard motors that he had to 8,000, but guys aren't out there doing that. I don't think very often. RPM is hard on motors. I know guys say that with turbos that it's not, but it is. If you run a motor at 2,000 RPM, it will run indefinitely. As you go up in engine speed, it won't do that anymore. Motors have a number of cycles. They have a cycle life. And so if you increase the number of RPM, you're going to have an earlier cycle life. And in my opinion, RPM is not good for motors. I don't like RPM. So running lots of RPM with lots of boost is race motor territory. And that's not what these are. These junkyard motors are not that. And because of the fact that we can at 6,500 or 7,000 RPM make enough power to break something that's stock in the motor, there's no reason for us to do it at 8,000 or 9,000 because it's just going to break a lot easier. Palmer, I did see the K-Series based V8 deal. I had a short conversation with him. I think that's awesome. A J35 would be really cool. The 5.9 Magnum is not going to be a big bang motor. So, Alan, what kind of engines do you have? That's why my rotary went bad. And the rotary is another example, but I was going to use the example of the B-Series Honda stuff. All the guys who wanted to run, like their thing was these motors will run to 10,000 RPM. Yeah, they probably will. But none of the ones that I ever saw, and this was way back in the day, none of them made power there. They were all way down on the far side of the power curve. They had already made their peak power at 8,000 or 8,500 like all of them did, because none of these had ultra short runners or enough ported head or enough cam timing in them to make power at 10,000 RPM. They all want, this is why I rev them, because it feels good. It makes good power. Yeah, but that's how you break your motor. There's no reason to run it there. And the same thing with rotaries. They think that rotaries will just run infinite RPM, but they won't. Yeah, the bigger the motor is, the easier it is to make power at a lower engine speed. And running under boost with a diesel is different than running under boost with a gas motor. $2,500 to 3,000 horsepower, 585 big block, mechanically injected alcohol, 1471 two-speed power glide. $9,300 RPM. That's a lot of RPM. Alan, you have 12 A's or 13 B's? Some of the new all-motor 8-second Honda hatches make power above 10,000. Yeah, the ones that I was talking about were B-Series, and this was back in 93 or 4, probably. Those are all K-series motors, and the K-series motors definitely like to rev. Would there be anything to gain running two identical turbos in series compounded versus parallel? Running them compound is going to give you more boost. If you run them in parallel, I think it's going to ultimately give you more airflow. So I like running conventional twin turbos and not running them compounded. If you take a look at the sport compact car that did a 200 wheel horsepower B16, that was probably my story because I did that with a B16 with an IR and cams and stuff, but it didn't run 10,000 RPM. It made peak power at 8,700. I'm building a 6-liter that's bored 30 over with a Summit 2618, forged pistons and H-beam rods, gap 28. Summit say 2. All that sounds good. Richard, I have a few rotary bell housings. Wow, is it Julius? Is it an adapter plate to go from a rotary to a conventional small block? The 12A's carburetor, does the 12A have a Mikuni carburetor on it? Yeah, Palmer, I know the guys that did that. That's the guys from Honda. That's Doug and the guys from Honda. They de-stroked it, and it was a 1.5 actually, because they had to run in a sub 1.5 class, and it did good, made good power. What would a 5.3 like RPM limit wise with dual 660 springs and the BTR cam 7,000 or less? I don't know which turbo cam and which intake. All of those things are going to dictate where it wants to make power. I don't. Who could I go to that's still alive and in practice is phenomenal with intake and head porting? What is it, an LS? What kind of combination is it? Vinny, a turbo compared to the Vortec is going to have a lot more average power. So it depends on how much power you want to make. But take a look at the 5-liter that I did with the GT. I think we ran a little GT45 on it, and it made 500 or 550. But you certainly could make a lot more than that. And then you could go up in size from the turbo from there, and you could make as much as 1,000. Although I wouldn't recommend it on a 5-liter. Andrew, take a look at the twin S475s that we did on the 6-liter. Gen 3 LQ4, 1,000 horsepower, wheel horsepower reliably. I don't know what you mean by reliably. Anytime you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower, it's you have to do what you need to do. You have to put ring gap in it. You have to put head studs, good gaskets. The fuel has to be spot on, the timing. You have to have a good intercooler. You have to have good fuel in it, not on pump gas. You're not going to be able to do that. But take a look at all the Gen 3 stuff. And we ran lots and lots of runs at 1,000 horsepower. So I think you should be able to make lots of passes like that. The factory 12A used a GM 180 adapter to suit the Holden Trimatic 3-speed auto. I don't know what a GM 180 adapter is. Would it allow us to run it on a conventional small block Chevy bell housing? 12A Holly probably make around 120 horsepower. That's good though. It would be cool. Guys would like to see rotary stuff. Aftermarket bell housing, but there are adapters out there. Got to remember, mate, that's before I started reading hot rod as an import guy. I'm both. I like imports and domestic stuff. So I'm more of an Obi-Wan fan. Yeah, the valve train is going to be a critical element for the blowfish. Another random thing. You've seen variable intake runner manifolds. Yes, I did. The four rotor RX-7 or the four rotor rotary, I guess, for Le Mans did that. And Formula One used to do that too. They had sliding trumpets. Then they weren't just in fixed positions. They would slide them during the RPM range as the thing was running, because the different runner lengths, if you put them in fixed positions, they create a sine wave. So what they're trying to do is take the top hump of every sine wave and put it in that position as the thing is revving up. It's really, really cool. Looking for Bob Glidden golden era type stuff. I'm trying to think of who does that stuff. Brian Tooley might know who can do that stuff, because he has Rick Smith working with him, and Rick's pretty sharp on all that older stuff. Are you planning on coming to Argentina? I wasn't. It would be cool though. Ooh, a Fiat 128, nice. I do like those. Let's see. I ran NA-Cam swap 5.3 with dual springs of 7,000 for 5 years until I spun a rod bearing. Also ran hardened push rods and training upgrades to work great until I tried 7,400. We've run lots of stuff at 7,500 without any problem. Ferrari 812 currently uses sliding trumpets in their production V12. Very cool. We have a lot of good rotary guys. Actually, Eric from West Tech is pretty good with rotaries. And I mean, we know how to make them work. That's not going to be a problem. Yes, everybody should have, John, everybody should have a 5-liter Mustang in their life. What's the most impressive engine, NA and turbo, that you've seen in your career? For me, there isn't one absolute thing. I've seen lots of very cool stuff that made lots and lots of good power. The stuff that Mahovitz does is insane with that 4.6. They're usually very specific things, like the stuff that I did with the little sprint motor. That was awesome. not because I'm awesome, just because it was awesome. Doing what it, like when we took it out and set land speed records with it, that was great. The first time I did over 200 wheel horsepower on the NAB series, that was an awesome thing because it hadn't really been done. There's lots of cool stuff. The first Big Bang motor that I did when we did what we thought was a 5.3 and it turned out to be a 4.8. I've got to watch lots of like real high horsepower stuff run at West Tech, but even low horsepower stuff. Like I got equally excited about the first time that we ran my Dodge 360 and also a small block Chevy that we ran when we configured it with a 2-barrel manifold and the stock air cleaner and the stock exhaust manifolds and the stock exhaust, and it made like 220 horsepower. We're like, wow, that's just awful, but it's awesome because it's a starting point. So there's not one like big horsepower deal that we did. We've done lots of really cool stuff. And I've been lucky enough to see stuff from Kazi and Duttweiler and those guys that do, really impressive stuff. It's kind of awesome. The stock bottom end 5.7, a GT45 would be good for that. Having problem melting inlet air temp sensors before you showed me how important intercoolers are. Yeah, that means it's too hot. If it's melting the sensor, that's bad. Yeah, the guys in Brazil, I think, are doing the push rod Fords and the 292 Chevys too, I think. Is the Aussie 5-liter intake different to the American ones? I know that the throttle body's on the opposite side, so the top of the manifold just turned around. I don't know. I don't know which 5-liter one you're talking about. I have one of the GT500, the magnesium ones from Ford Racing. That's the only one that I have, though. My 2.3 little Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, those are great. Marcus, just tell me how much power you want. Let's see. For the cam you did on the 8,000 RPM small block Ford, what LSA would you recommend? I don't want a super sharp punch, but I don't want the rev range between while to be dull. Between, I'll take a look. We ran two of them. I ran one from Brian Tooley Racing, and I still have those cams if anybody's interested in them. I ran one from Brian Tooley Racing and one from Billy at Comp, and they're different configurations. They both allowed the motor to run to 8,000 RPM. They made a little bit different power. Brian's made more kind of average power. Billy's made a little bit more peak. So again, it's always a trade-off between what you want and where you want it. Yeah, sliding trumpets are awesome because changing the runner length has a dramatic effect on the power curve. Steve Morris does build some great stuff. I like watching his stuff. He's like Tom Nelson. They build really super powerful stuff and high dollar stuff. Dean, how do you make 395 horsepower from one 2-barrel Weber? Phone's messing up. It's a 332 with 9.1, 9 or 10 pounds. Will the Vortec FMU and intercooler work with the turbo? The intercooler is actually kind of small from the Vortec. It's limited in power. We know that we've run it on a couple of different combinations, and it limits the power output. It doesn't have enough flow rate. The FMU is not what I would use for fuel management. It's definitely old school. You need to take timing away, so the timing and the air fuel need to be fairly precise, and it's going to be more critical on a turbo because you're going to you might have 150 more foot-pounds of torque at 3,500 or 4,000 RPM with a turbo than you did with the Vortec. So you're going to have a lot more cylinder pressure and a lot more chance for detonation. So you got to be spot on your tuning for that. CJ, send me an email and I'll let you know what the cams are. Standard Ford Falcon 5-liter injected manifold. So Julius, are you talking about a 5-liter Coyote motor or mod motor or a 5-liter OG 302, 1988 Mustang? Alan, you're lifting heads at 30 PSI and 85. We've run that kind of boost on stuff and we haven't lifted the head. So on ours, when we were that high, like on the 6-liter Big Bang motor, we ran the CA625 head studs and MLS gaskets. Those were LS9 gaskets, I believe, that we ran. Are you sure it's not detonating? Do you have the timing right on it? You should be running very low timing. It should be down in the teens at 30 pounds with the 85. We like to run, when we ran the Big Bang on it, we ran 118. Yeah, I don't know that you're going to get an 8,000 RPM 363 stroker, nice average power. I don't know that you can get all of that. It's going to, if you have an 8,000 RPM motor, it's going to be peaky. Palmer, I've never seen those 5-cylinder motors, but I do want to run the 5-cylinder family version of the 4200 though. The AFR 220 heads are good. So Alan, you're at 32 degrees with 30 psi, and you want to know why you lifted the heads? Do you think 8,000 RPM would be nice for the 112 LSA? You have to talk more than just the LSA. That's not what's going to determine the RPM. 32 degrees, total F2, Pro Charge, AFR. Oh, so this is an old school small block, not an LS, right? Okay, guys, we've been here a long time. Been here an hour and a half. Why are you guys keeping me here so long? I have to get going. I'm gonna start a war here, but is a Coyote or LS better in terms of performance, not counting price? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know which LS you're talking about, which ones you're comparing. You would put those in different cars and stuff. Both of them can make lots and lots of power. But the reason that people buy LS motors and don't buy Coyotes is because of price. You can go down the wrecking yard and get one for a few $100s. You can't do that with a Coyote. So it wouldn't matter if they were 100 times better, which they're not. They cost 100 times as much. The 706 heads with titanium retainers would be theoretically better for RPM, but it's not just the valve train weight. It's also the stability of the camshaft that determines if you get valve balance or float and stuff. So it's not just more spring rate and less weight, although the less weight does help stuff. Thank you guys for showing up, and I will see you guys later. I don't know when I'll be back on. We're working on some stuff, and I'll let you know about that the next time we come back on. I've got some more videos coming up. We are going to be doing I want to do the compressor map stuff so we can talk about that and show you what's going on and where it's going on and why it's going on, all of that. We've got some good stuff on a OG small block. We went from stock basically to modified and then boosted. So we got some cool stuff coming up. And then obviously we have the 4200 stuff coming back up. We're going to run even more boost with that. Lots of cool stuff coming up. Thanks for showing up, guys. I will talk to you later.